thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the organizers, especially Elizabeth, and I've enjoyed working with you all. And I think Elizabeth's talk is a very nice introduction to what I'm going to talk about. As Aman mentioned, I work on the plant ontology project, the Plantiome suite of ontologies, as Pankaj introduced earlier this morning. Maybe I'll just use this. Is this the clicker here? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this slide might look familiar to you. Pankaj showed this, but this just shows an example of some of the species-specific ontologies developed by the crop ontology and that we're working on integrating into the Plantiome suite of ontologies. And there's a few examples here. And one of the things I wanted to point out on this slide is how different all of these plant species are. And of course, as breeders or data managers, you're probably aware of that. And you can see a selection of some of the traits that we're dealing with across these species. So the question is, how can we make interspecific comparisons across these ontologies when these plant species and the traits are so different? And so that's what our challenge is faced in the reference ontologies. So our goal is to integrate these traits across species and resources by using the ontologies developed in the reference ontologies and the trait ontology hierarchy can gather these traits and allow users to do searches across them for sorting traits and also the annotation data for such things as the trait categories, such as morphology, yield, stress, or biochemical traits. Also, you can search across the ontologies for plant parts or growth stage, biological processes, etc. So this unified view that we're developing really facilitates these cross-species queries and data discovery for our users. So I wanted to just give a little example of what our workflow is for mapping between the crop ontologies and the reference ontologies. The first step is the trait dictionary, which is developed by the different CG centers, contains traits, methods, scales, and variables, and that's converted into an ontology file by Marie-Angelique. And at that point, the category terms are removed, and that means in the trait dictionary ontology file, they have like agronomical, morphological, these different trait categories. So those are removed, and then we just have a flat list. And then Marie has developed a semi-automated mapping process where we map the CO trait terms to the TO terms. And I'll explain that semi-automated mapping in a little bit more detail in a minute here. So, and then once that's done, the CO terms are labeled with the crop name and the type of trait that it is, or the type of term it is, such as trait, method, scale, or variable. And I just wanted to point out that in the Plantiome, we're only mapping the trait term to the trait terms in the TO, and then the method, the scale, and the variable are all related to the CO trait term. So in that way, you can follow through and look at the different variables that are associated with those traits. And we label the CO terms with the crop name to differentiate them because not everyone is familiar with what the number codes mean. And that way you can look at it, and I'll show you an example of that, but you can look at it and see what's a wheat term and what's a rice term and so on. So at that point, it's important to do some manual curation to validate these mappings. And also, in case any are missed during the automated mapping step, it's a good idea to have a curator go through and take a look at those and complete any missing ones. So, and once that's done, then the map traits are displayed on the Plantiome Amigo browser in an integrated hierarchy. And this slide looks similar to the one Pankaj showed. This is one of our example slides that we use. And this is an example of the integration of, let me see, this pointer works. So species-specific ontologies. And this shows the upper level ontology hierarchy from the reference ontologies. On this side is the plant ontology terms. These are the trait ontology terms. And these are quality terms from the ontology called PATO, which is a reference for the qualities. And if you notice here at the bottom, under the TO plant height trait, we have grouped lentil, rice, wheat, and cassava plant height. And that's not to say that they're defined the same. It's just to say that these terms are all measuring something similar. And those annotations can be gathered up and grouped under the TO reference plant height term. So how does this actually work? And the way it is because in the trait ontology terms are actually what we call precomposed. So they're a combination of an entity, which is a being or a thing, and a quality which describes it. So an example is that a trait is a characteristic or a quality, and this can be measured at a wide range of levels, everything from an individual cell, and actually smaller than a cell, to a whole plant, and all the way up to a population level, field level, or canopy level. And these traits can be defined what we call entity quality statements. So this example of the TO term for leaf area is composed of the PO term leaf and the PATO term for area. And this entity quality construction is what we would call a design pattern, an ontology design pattern. So this is one example of a design pattern. So this automated mapping process that we go through is actually based on these design patterns. And this is showing you an example with the entity quality pattern. For example, the wheat term for spike length. The entity involved there is the plant ontology term inflorescence, which has the synonym spike, and the PATO term for length. And the TO term has a similar structure. It has the inflorescence from the plant ontology and the PATO term for length combined in it already. And behind the scenes, we know that that's what it's made up of. So when the computer reasoner runs across these, it says, oh, these are equivalent terms, and this term can be mapped to the TO term. So once that's done, it's important to have a manual process look at this and complete any of the missing ones. So this is actually kind of an important step, and it requires quite a good understanding of the crop species and the reference ontologies. And as I pointed out, all these crop species are very different. And I definitely don't pretend to be an expert in cassava or lentil. And so we reach out to the user groups and the domain experts in each of these areas, and also to botany experts, so we can understand what these plant parts are that they're looking at and what the traits are that they're studying. And so it's also important to understand the structure of the ontology terms that we're using to map these. And I wanted to just put a note here for all the CG folks that are involved in creating these trait dictionaries, and we'll talk about more of this afternoon in the different sessions. But it's really important to have a good definition of what you're measuring, and that's very helpful when we're trying to disentangle this mapping. So the manual curation is definitely high quality, but we all know these things are costly and time-consuming to perform. So just wanted to give you a little overview of the progress of the mappings. We have 10 crop vocabularies that have been mapped to the TO, and this map here shows the list of the traits, and then about roughly how many had to be manually curated. So ideally, as we move forward, we can bring those numbers down and speed up this process. So in conclusion, design patterns can be used to map the ontologies in an automated fashion, but it still requires some manual curation. And the TO is certainly being enriched by the addition of these terms from the crop ontologies. It's an iterative process. We find things that we need to fix in the TO or add. And the Plantiome integrates the data in our database that's been annotated in our database in a unified way from the breeding and genetic communities. And you can visit plantiome.org and access that data and use it in your own applications, as Pankaj mentioned this morning. So how can you get involved? You can come and explore annotations in our ontologies. You can create a GitHub account. Many of you already have one, and make comments on them and share your own ontology. And we encourage you to annotate your data and work with us to submit it to the repository. And you probably don't want to write all these down, but I'm sure these slides will be shared later. So there's some links for you to speed up your searches. And I just want to acknowledge the Plantiome is a very big project, and some of the CG folks are listed here that we've worked with, some who are now gone and some who are still here. And that's it. Thank you.